We've got if I put the PowerPoint up, thanks. Right, so it's a while since I spoke. Last time I spoke, I think, and I spoke in August, but before that I spoke on the Jubilee, Queen's Jubilee weekend when she was still with us. And I talked very much on the idea of her sense of duty, of serving, of providing service. And that's been a theme that's come back about we all have something to do. We all have something to serve in. I don't know if you were here in August when Steve and Julia Lawton were here as guest speakers. And again, they had no clue what was going on in the church, but the same kind of thing, that idea we all have something to do. I remember him saying, why are you letting the pastor be out doing the Sunday school? You should be doing that. And yet he should be able to be free to be concentrating on leading and the strategic stuff. I don't know if anyone remembers that. But he was saying, we all need to step up and do stuff. And then Gemma, I think it was September the 18th, it'll be on YouTube if you want to listen to it. Again, she was talking about how we all have things to do. We all have roles to serve in. And God has called us to do things. And yet, sometimes we see, there are gaps. And why is that? And something, the guest speakers we had in August, Julia Lawton, she said after the service, she said, when I was young, when I was in my 20s, I didn't have the confidence. And that just struck a chord with me. There's some people, as leaders, we sometimes think, why aren't people stepping up? Why didn't we have any singers this morning? Why don't we have people on the sound desk? Why don't we? But people might think the sound desk is scary. People might think standing on a stage is scary. People might think going out and having a bunch of kids in the Sunday school, they might be a bit scared of it. They might be a bit nervous about what could go wrong. And that whole thing of confidence and that whole thing of being willing to step out. So I don't think it's people think, I can't be bothered to get out of bed on a Sunday morning. Maybe in some cases. But for a lot of people, and it's not just Sunday mornings, it's whatever else God's called us to do. But for some people, it's more a case, I think, of I don't know, scared's quite the right word, but there's that concern about if I step out, what will happen? And even last week, you look at Rachel, who was with us last week, in Madagascar. Going to Madagascar is a step of faith. How many of us would be willing, if God told us to? How many people maybe has God told to go to Madagascar or elsewhere, and they've just not done it because they're a bit scared maybe? Or they don't feel up to it? They don't feel qualified? So there's something there, I think, that I want to look at today. The things that stop us, I've titled it, Where Are You Hiding? Because I'm going to look at Gideon. So if I come on to we need to get the big screen fixed. The projector's dead. If you can read those, great. Otherwise, that screen's gone off as well. Otherwise, you can get your Bible or I'll read it out to you. So we're looking at Judges chapter 6. So the background of this is Israel has been basically occupied and oppressed by the Midianites. Basically, as a judgment because they had been ignoring God. And so God allowed them to be occupied by the Midianites. So, verse 1 of Judges 6, it says they did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's the background to it. That's why they ended up in a mess. But we come to verse 11, after the sort of background to the whole story in Judges 6. And if you want to read the story, it's Judges 6 through to about chapter 8. But verse 11, we get to the bit with Gideon. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress, in order to hide it from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." Gideon said to him, "O my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about? Saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? So he said to him, O my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. So God is calling Gideon. But Gideon's reaction is, who, me? Yeah. You sure you're talking to me? There's not someone standing behind me, looking over my shoulder. My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. He does not feel qualified. He does not feel like people will follow him. And maybe in the natural way of looking at things, maybe he's right. But how many of us, we don't feel qualified for something? We don't feel like we can do it. We don't maybe feel like we're qualified to teach a Sunday school. We don't feel like we're a good enough singer to sing on the platform. Whatever it is, we don't feel qualified. But that's not what God is saying. God is saying to us, I've called you. But, it is hard. It does mean we have to expose ourselves when we step out and do things. Are we worried about, if we do the sound, are we worried about meeting the worship leader at the wrong time? It gets embarrassing, but we've all been embarrassed, or spiritual gifts. That's another thing, Spiritual gifts are hard sometimes because you've got to step out and take a risk. If God gives you a word for someone, there's always that, what if I'm wrong? And it's those what ifs, I think, are the key thing. We say, what if, what if, what if. So, for the young men, what if I ask this girl out and she says no? What if I audition for a show and I don't get the part? What if we have kids and they have a disease, so maybe we won't have kids? What if I step out and do the prophetic word and I get it wrong? What if I do the Sunday school and the kids just don't listen to me? What if I pray for someone for healing and they don't get healed? To be honest with that one, if you pray for someone for healing and they don't get healed, they're no worse off than they were. You might as well have a go. But you just need to step out. But the converse of that is, what if you ask the girl out and she says yes? What if you audition and you get the part? But you'll never know unless you step out. What if, you do the Sunday school and you're that influence? I remember Sunday school teachers from when I was young who had such an influence on my life. What if you're that person for some of these kids? But if you don't step out, you won't do that. What if you give someone that prophetic word and it's just that word from God that they need to hear, that really speaks into their situation? What if you pray for someone and they get healed? But you won't know unless you try. So, here God is saying to Gideon, I've called you, I've asked you to do this. And then if we read on, have I gone too far? Where's the bit where it says, I am with you? So I've lost myself. I've gone enthusiastic and lost myself in my notes. Verse 13, okay, yeah. 15, yeah. 16, yeah, that's it, sorry. There we go. Found it. So what does God say? Verse 16, and the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. Yeah, and he is with us. Jesus, pretty much the last thing he said in the Great Commission, I am with you to the very end of the age. He's just emphasising that. Like the last thing, I will be with you to the very end of the age. He is with us. And sometimes we might need that. We really sometimes need an encounter with God. If we look at verses 17 onwards, so Gideon talking to God, then he said to him, if I have found favour in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I will wait until you come back. So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in a basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. The angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. And he did so. Then the angel of the Lord put out the end of the staff that was in his hand and touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread, and the angel of the Lord departed out of his sight. Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord, in capitals. That's an appearance of Christ in the Old Testament, in theophany. So Gideon said, alas, O Lord God, for I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. Then the Lord said to him, peace be with you, do not fear, you shall not die. But he had that encounter with Jesus. And some of us, maybe we need that because we just need really to know that. But if we come, he comes to me, I will be in no means cast out. If we come to Jesus, you look at the woman in the New Testament where she had the issue of blood, and she came and touched the hem of Jesus' garment. And Jesus, she was healed. Even without Jesus saying or doing it, if we come to Jesus, there's power there. And that power, the same power that raised Jesus from the dead, is at work within us, it says in Ephesians. So, he is with us, he is powerful, he will touch us, he will act on our behalf. And we need to know that, we need to remember that. So we'll come back to that in a bit, but let's just go through the rest of the story of Gideon. So we've gone to verse 25. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, take your father's young bull, the second bull is 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it. So Gideon did that. If you look at verse 27, so Gideon took 10 men from among his servants and did as the Lord had said to him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of the city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. So again, we see Gideon is subject to the fear. We all are. There's things that we all, if we're honest, we're afraid of stepping up sometimes. We're afraid of doing things. There's two things about this. One, sometimes there are things in our lives that we need to deal with. Sometimes we've got, Baal, they're worshipping Baal instead of worshipping God. Sometimes there's things we've put ahead of God. If we really want to see God move, we need to say, I'm going to get rid of those things that I'm putting ahead of God. Whatever that is in your life, and it's different for each of us. But there are some things maybe we need to put aside, some things in our lives that we need to tear down. And that's part of it. You see that over and over again. When the Israelites came into the Promised Land, they all had to be purified and circumcised. In the passage I keep coming back to for the worship, 2 Chronicles 5, where the glory of God fell in the temple. But if you read the verses before that, the priests had all purified themselves. There's something about that when we purify ourselves, when we get rid of those things that shouldn't be in our lives, it brings power. That's not to say we're not saved or we're not Christians, but if we really want to see the best of what God has for us, there's some things we need to tear down. But again, Gideon, we see that fit. He did it by night. He didn't go out boldly. I can identify with them because sometimes we don't want to maybe be, brash about things. Sometimes we are a bit afraid of what reactions will be. But sometimes there's just things we need to do. But then the next thing we see, and this is key, that if we follow the story through, which is what I'm kind of doing. If we go into chapter 7, it's in God's strength, it's not our own. So chapter 7, verse 1, then Jerubbaal, that's Gideon, that's another name for him, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped besides the well of Harod. So that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim the glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. And then we go on, and initially Gideon says, if you're afraid, then go home. And they're down to about 10,000, and then they whittle it down to there's 300 people. Because God says there's too many here. You'll take the credit for yourselves. And sometimes, that's maybe a topic for another day, but if we are looking for God to do stuff, there's that thing, if I pray for someone to be healed, and they're healed, does that make me puffed up? I think sometimes that's why God maybe struggles to find people to entrust that ministry to, because it's so easy for us to get puffed up. But it's lest they take the glory for them, claim the glory for themselves. But that's kind of an aside. But the key thing about this is it's God who does it, not us. If we're willing to step out and use his strategies, and if you read on, those of us who grew up in Sunday school know the story, they had the pictures and they had the torches inside, and the 300 men took the pictures into the camp, broke them and blew trumpets, and the fire from the torches and the light, and the Midianites panicked, completely panicked, and most of them killed each other. Didn't know who was fighting who in the dark. But that's God's strategy, and we need to do it God's way, not our own way. And it may be, again, God is calling us to do things that we might not naturally want to do, at least initially. But if we have God's strategy and we do it in his strength, that's when we're successful. In a church context, if we try and build the church in our own strength, it doesn't matter how great. I could go to the school across the road, take the best teacher from that school and put them in the Sunday school, and I'm sure they'd do a good job in some ways. But it's not about your human skills. It's about God working through you and just allowing God to work. And that's the key to it. And God does things differently. I'm just going to read, I think it's on the PowerPoint, Renata. It's a couple of slides on, I might come back. 1 Corinthians 1 in the Message, verses 26. Take a good look, friends, at who you were when you got called into this life. I don't see many of the brightest and best among you, not many influential, not many from high society families. Isn't it obvious that God deliberately chose men and women that the culture overlooks and exploits and abuses, chooses these nobodies to expose the hollow pretension of the somebodies? That makes it quite clear that none of you can get by with blowing your own horn before God. Everything that we have, right thinking and right living, a clean slate and a fresh start, comes from God by way of Jesus Christ. That's why we have the saying, if you're going to blow a horn, blow a trumpet for God. We go back to Gideon, they literally did blow trumpets for God. But in the old, the more traditional versions, you see your calling, brethren, not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. So it's not necessarily about whether we are the best teacher, the best singer. There are musicians, and I've been playing in worship bands for, I started in church more than 40 years ago now. Which makes me feel very old. When I was quite young, to be fair. And it was just with an acoustic guitar that thankfully no one could hear above the organ and the piano. But I've played with a bunch of musicians over the years in worship settings. And I've played with professional musicians who are technically amazing. And yet I've played with amateurs who just have that heart for God. And they just carry something. And if you look at David, with Saul, David is filled with the Spirit. And then he plays for Saul. And there's something, it's a chapter after he's anointed and filled with the Spirit that he's then called to play for Saul. And I'm sure David was a very good player. You're not going to get called to play for the king unless you are a good player. But the fact is, it's the Spirit that someone carries. And I've played with, and I've been in congregations where you've got people who might not be the most gifted musicians, but they just have a heart for God. They have a heart for worship. They're connecting with God. And I've played with other people who are the most amazing professional musicians. When we were at a big church in central London. And there's something not quite there. And it is about whether we're willing to be used. Not many mighty, not many noble. God uses the foolish things. So we need to just be willing to put aside that fear. If we go back to the first chapter, the first bit. Sorry, I've got my notes out of order. Where's page 1 gone? I lost it. But basically where he says, mighty man, he addresses Gideon as mighty man of God. And he says, the Lord is with you. That's what we've got to remember. We might not feel. Gideon did not think he was a mighty man of God. I'm the least in my family. My family is the least important in Manasseh, is basically what he said. I'm a nobody. I'm the foolish things of the world. Yet God chooses those foolish things to shame the wise. So all of us, we can do this. And if we're saying, I'm not qualified, that's basically, if God says you're qualified, if God calls you mighty man or mighty woman, you're qualified. No matter what people around you say, no matter what your family say, no matter what your teachers have said, no matter what anyone says, if God says to you, I am with you, mighty man of God, then you are qualified. And I think some of us, it is that, maybe it's just knowing that, but whether it's just a fear thing, and fear does paralyse. But whatever it is that's holding us back, and it may be the feeling we're not qualified, it may just be outright fear. But whatever it is, we've got to put that aside. And this fear and the passivity, and the other thing is passivity. Sometimes we're safer or feel safer. Yeah. Sometimes, we like that feeling of being good at something. We like that feeling we know what we're doing. And if you're great at, whatever it is, you like to do that. You like to do what you're good at, what you know you're good at. And sometimes that's escapism. It might be computer games. You might want to get the highest score. You might want to do whatever. And you can do it. You can beat the game. And so you get that satisfaction of having done something. Because God has called us to do something. God's called Gideon to do this. God's called all of us to do something. Ephesians 2:10. We are his workmanship, created for good works that he's prepared for us. God has prepared stuff for us to do. And if we're not doing those, we're not going to feel fulfilled. And if we're escaping by putting our time and effort into other things, and sometimes they might be good things. Gideon, going back to the beginning of this, was threshing wheat in the winepress to hide from the Midianites. Because if he did it in the threshing floor, he's worried they'd see him, or that's where they expect him to be. Now, threshing wheat isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing to be doing. And some of us are threshing wheat. We're doing good things, But maybe it's time for us to step out into something new. And some of us may be just hiding away, doing something else, just because it's those what ifs again. What if I do that and I stick my neck out and, I guess because I play in the worship and do the worship, it's an example I'll use. But if you come up on the stage, if you're new to it, that can be very nerve-wracking. And it might be something else for other people, but whatever it is, the first time you do something, it might be nerve-wracking. But if God's calling us to move on from threshing the wheat to going out and doing something else, then we need to be willing to step out and do that. But it's so easy to be passive. And being passive, is right back at the root of everything. If we go back to Genesis chapter 3 in the garden, when Adam and Eve fell. So when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. And Adam, if you notice, she gave some to her husband who was with her. We have this image that Eve did it on her own, and then Adam was with her. Adam had been directly told by God, don't eat that. Did Adam intervene? He took the easy way out, in a way. And that's what we do. And especially for men, in this modern world, that passivity is a real problem. How many times do we just take the easy way out and just be passive and not sort of maybe intervene or not take the steps that we should do? Right from the beginning, right in the very first sin, a lot of it's because somebody's being passive and it's not just about not what you don't do, it's not doing what you should do. And that passivity is dangerous. And the end result is, again, like for a different reason, but they end up hiding again. They end up hiding in the bushes when God comes round in the evening. And some of us, maybe we're trying to hide from God. Maybe it's because we know we've done something wrong. Maybe we know there's something in our lives that we need to put right. Maybe some of us, it's the fear. Whatever the reason we're hiding, we can't keep hiding. We've got to be willing to step out. We've got to stop being passive. And if God says to you, mighty man, mighty woman, you need to act on that. And whatever it is, God said to Gideon, I've called you to deliver this people. And it might be something different for you, but whatever it is, you need to step out, and we all of us, same for me, I'm kind of preaching to myself here, but we need to stop being passive. But out of that thing in Genesis where they sinned, they fell, God killed an animal, there's sacrifice. And all the Old Testament sacrifices look forward to Jesus. And Gideon, he made that sacrifice and the fire fell on it. There's always sacrifice. All of those sacrifices point forward to the ultimate sacrifice that Jesus made on the cross. Yeah. And if we're hiding for whatever reason, we can come to Jesus. We can come to the cross. If we've got things in our lives that are not as they should be, we can come to the cross and we can get forgiveness. And there is power there to see that changed. And, we always come back to what Jesus did at the cross. And there's power in the cross, and there's power that raised Jesus from the dead. That's the central event in history. And if for some of us, maybe we are in a place where we've got stuff in our lives that that is a problem, and we come to the cross and we bring it to Jesus. And there's power to deal with it, and we need that forgiveness. And maybe there's a handful of people here who've not ever come to Jesus. Now, mate, do it today. Just say, I'm coming to you, Jesus. Thank you for what you did at the cross. Thank you for bearing my punishment. And say, I'm going to put my trust in you. I'm going to follow you. That's what it is. It's coming to the cross because of what Jesus... And wherever we're at, whether we're a Christian a long time or whether you've never done that, it's something we need to do. It's why we do communion on a regular basis. Do this in remembrance of me. His broken body. This is my body that I break, that is broken for you. It comes back to the cross. And some of us, maybe we just need to just come to Jesus and say, whatever our situation is, we just need to come to the cross and we just need an encounter with Jesus. And that's what it's fundamentally about. That's what it always comes back to, is Jesus at the cross and the death and resurrection and what he did for us at the cross. And that's foreshadowed in Genesis. He will crush the serpent's head with his heel. That's prophesied right back from Genesis 3. Right then, as soon as Adam fell, God had the plan, probably before that. It says the lamb slain from before the foundation of the world. God always had that plan. So we come back to the cross. And that perfect love. You have to start wrapping it up. It says perfect love casts out fear. And that was the perfect love. The love that came and died for us. And some of us, it's that love that drove Jesus to the cross. That perfect love drives out fear. So if we're afraid of stepping out and doing stuff, or we feel we don't qualify, we just need to know his love, his presence with us, because that's what drives out that fear. That's what enables us to do it. And the power of the Holy Spirit as well. I am with you. So, I've deliberately left a bit of time. It's only 12:10. I just want to give us some time to respond to this. So, Andrew, if you don't mind, we're going to sing that song, No Longer Slaves. I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God. If you've never come to Jesus, then come to him and become a child of God. But just before we sing that, I saw something on Facebook yesterday that just struck a chord with me. So I don't know how many people know Stephen Curtis Chapman. He's a singer, been around a long time. I think the first album was about 35 years ago. Great guy, written some great songs. But there's a quote I saw on Facebook yesterday that someone shared. I silenced those voices. I finally said, I don't think I need to wrestle with the question of does the world need another song or album from Stephen Curtis Chapman? The fact is I need to write these songs. I need to steward these things, the stories, the songs, these melodies, and these words I feel that God has stirred in me. I think especially, whether this is a word for someone who's a little bit more mature, but Stephen Curtis Chapman, he's a grandfather. He's been doing it for 35 years. I think his first album was 87. He's won more Gospel Music Association Dove Awards than anyone else ever in history. And yet he still feels like that. He's still got these doubts that people want to hear another album. And then he says, I need to steward these things. And these words I feel like God has stirred in me. All of us, even those of us who've been around a long time, we may be at that point where we just need to stir things up again. And I think there's a word there for someone who maybe is a little bit more mature. God's still going to use you. God still has things for you to do. Silence those voices. God still has things. And whatever they are, just step out. Maybe before we sing, can we just let Andrea play and just be quiet for a bit? Lord, right now, just speak to us. Holy Spirit, just Drop things into our hearts, Lord. You can speak to us. Lord, we may already know what it is you've called us to do. Lord, just remind us of that. Lord, you have good works that you have planned for us to do. Lord, just let that be a truth that just resonates within us, Lord, that we just know that there are things we need to do and that no one else will do, Lord. Lord, where there are things that are holding us, where there are things that are in our lives that shouldn't be, Lord, just forgive us for the things that we've been doing that we shouldn't be. Lord, just cleanse us with your blood. Let us just know, Lord, your word says there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. Lord, just let us know that. Let us know that there is no condemnation. Just remind us of that again. Let us stand on those truths. There is no condemnation. We are not disqualified. If you look at people in the Bible, Jacob cheated and schemed. Peter denied Christ. David had an affair and committed murder. Jonah ran away from God. Paul was involved in Stephen's murder. He called himself the chief of sinners. Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. Moses had an anger problem and killed someone. Abraham thought he was too old. Lazarus was dead. Dead's about as disqualified as you can feel. But, that did not disqualify them. God used all of those people. So no matter how you feel about yourself, you are qualified to do whatever it is that God has called you to do. And that's just a word that you need to just take on board this morning. Let's just be silent for a minute and just meditate on that. If you're really not sure about, maybe you feel, I don't know what God's called me to do, or I don't know what it is I should be doing, God will show us. It says in James, if any man lacks wisdom, he should ask God, who gives liberally. God will give us wisdom. God will show us. Lord, I just ask for all of us, just speak to us now. Give us your wisdom for our situations. Just speak your words into our situation. Something about God's words. I'm going to maybe take a bit of a risk now, but one of the things that is difficult is, takes courage to step out, is if you have a prophetic word or anything. If God is giving anyone anything, if you feel you have a word, I think there's things here that God is giving words, not just to me, but He's giving words to other people. So if you have something that you feel God has given you, then please, I just want to make a bit of time to come and share, and we can minister to people. If people want prayer for anything, please come forward and we'll make time to pray for you.